Hi everyone, and thank you so much for joining me here today at LudoNarraCon panel, Diverse Cyberpunk Stories, Humanizing Identities and Finding Alternate Universes. Of course, cyberpunk has been such a big genre in the last few years, really cultivating new ideas and very much playing with different subject positions. So here with me today, I have some amazing speakers. I'm so excited. Son from Love Shore, Chris from Valhalla, Tale from Umurangi Generation, excuse me, and myself, Tanya from Solace State. Honestly, they have done some incredible work. I'm so honored to be with you here today to discuss the different perspectives that cyberpunk can explore. And hopefully it'll give you some spark of new ideas, and you should really check out their games because they're all on Steam. I've played all of the demos as well as the actual games themselves, the ones that have been released, such as Valhalla and Umurangi Generation. And you should really check out and wishlist, of course, the ones that are going to be released, such as Love Shore and Solace State. So without any further ado, please, let's go into introductions. If we can start off with just everyone giving an elevator pitch of your game, your name, of course, your gender, and your and what you do in your game as well. Yeah. Okay, Son.
Yeah, I'll hop into it. I'm Sun, she, they. I make Love Shore. It's a cyberpunk queer noir thriller. I have said that many times, so it feels very pitch-like, because it is. In our game, basically, you follow two cyborgs in a cyberpunk city where you realize all of the gangs that are controlled are by hidden gods. And so you're trying to solve a murder mystery at the same time as trying to stop a war between two gods that's going to wipe your city out. And yeah, we do a lot of fun relationship dynamics, because what's a VN without good relationship dynamics?
And to Chris, that's so exciting.
All right, I'm Chris. I'm the director at Sukeban Games. We made Cyberpunk Bartender Action Valhalla, and we're currently working on a bunch of projects. It's actually kind of overwhelming. The game that's already out, though, Valhalla, that's pretty cool. It's about a woman working a bar in a cyberpunk city. And stuff, and the issues that arise from living in such a rotten society. It doesn't sound too much like an elevator pitch because I don't actually talk too much about the game in this fashion. So if it sounds confusing, then that's maybe why.
You're doing a great job. I'm so excited for all the works that your studio has already created and are going to create as well. Awesome.
I just want to say, big fan of Valhalla.
Thank you.
It was my introduction to making cyberpunk content, actually.
Oh my god, that's really cool.
Yeah, it was a really good game.
Thank you.
I know that
so much.
My introduction to Valhalla was my friend actually reviewed the when you did the Cyberpunk Jam demo, and they're like, you got to check this out. It's really cool, and that was my introduction to it, and then it's watching it grow and become this thing over.
Yeah, it's so huge
years
now.
After that. It's really inspiring to see, just that core idea taken and grown into that thing. It was really, really positive.
It's really cool to know. Really cool to hear. Thank you.
Yeah. So kia ora, everyone. My name's Talo Faulkner. I made Umurangi Generation last year. Well, a little bit of 2019 in there as well, but so what that is, it's a cyberpunk photography game where you sort of take photos of objectives, which are called photo bounties, and what it is sort of like a brief description or a loose description of something, kind of similar to what you would see in Where's Wally or I Spy, those books we all sort of probably consumed at some point. But rather than it being just about finding something, it's about taking a photo of that specific thing. So it actually gives the player a lot of agency to sort of figure out how to take that photo, and that way they're actually doing a creative process as the gameplay itself. To talk a little bit about, I guess, the story or content of it, I guess it's sort of it's about looking at sort of neoliberalism not being able to address the problems it creates, And knowing this talk, we'll get a lot more into neoliberalism and very political and stuff. But
I'll say I'd be surprised if we don't.
Because the point of that is to sort of, and we'll get more into this, I think, in the chat. But I remember this idea that cyberpunk being this mirror that you hold up to what you're going through now, and exaggerate or make very plain the sort of points. And I think with Umurangi Generation and the sort of subject matter of what happens, especially towards the end, it's sort of about looking at these problems this system creates, and how it also tries to sort of skirt its responsibility of like even owning up to causing the problem. But I'm really happy to be here, so thank you.
I'm so happy that you're here, and I already want to jump in without introducing myself, because I was just like, yes, let's talk about all of these threads, let's do it. But yes, my name is Tanya Khan. I'm the developer of Solace State with my studio Vivid Foundry. And Solace State is a 3D visual novel in which you play as a young hacker who undergoes a political awakening, if you will, as she engages with people from all different walks of life in a biotech militarized society. So a lot of this is really driving home the idea of the personal is political, which I'll get really into, because we really want to emphasize people from marginalized backgrounds actually participating in a political universe with all of its intrigues and unevenness. So that's Solace State. And without any further ado, let's jump into just the nitty gritty of it. The basic questions is, why cyberpunk? How would you define it? And what's the point of creating cyberpunk content now?
Who's going first?
Yeah, right.
That's always been all...
who wants to talk about it?
Well, I would say with that question, something I've been thinking about a lot lately is with cyberpunk as the genre. It's that idea of looking at what's going on now and reflecting back on that. But I guess the more cynical thing I've been thinking about, as we've seen, I guess, the cyberpunk genre go through its like retro 80s mode a few years ago or whatever, is I kind of think of this question, it's like, whose cyberpunk dystopia is it actually, right? In terms of when these sort of fictional spaces are sort of created, what is sort of the sort of set of implicit assumptions and biases that are actually built into saying must be a bad thing. So like the thing I can sort of think of with that is the cyberpunk genre is this thing that is very much informed by the 80s, and as its sort of foundational or introductory sort of like set of assumptions and stuff that was sort of put in there, it tends to just be what kind of people thought in the 80s, right? Like it's like one of the things I'm sort of thinking about recently is like, how is sex work portrayed in cyberpunk dystopias? Because I mean, anyone who's sort of been alive in the last 5 years can see that that's become quite a or it's becoming more of this thing that people aren't as I guess traditional or afraid of. Like for example, with like Maori people and our culture and stuff, sex work has like a different, like if we're talking before like colonization stuff, sex work had its place in society, and you can obviously see that in other cultures around the world. So when we see, I think, in certain cyberpunk games where sex work is portrayed as this idea, like, and it's very done, I think, implicitly, it's this idea of like moral decency has gone down the drain in the future. But it's like, well, whose moral decency are you talking about when you say this stuff? Because I think I just think that stuff's kind of interesting, because it's sort of like when those worlds are created, how that stuff is portrayed, I think actually shows the audience your hand, I think, in terms of what you kind of believe to be a sort of like, this is what's good and bad, or this is essentially like how that society has treated certain things like that. I guess that's the thing I kind of think about with that, because I think there's a property to sort of like taking that space and growing the sort of cyberpunk thing where it grows out of the 80s. Like, I don't think cyberpunk is ever about how many times you can connect your gun into your head. It's more about like looking at what's the problem going on now and exaggerating or making it plain what the issue actually is.
Yeah, I'm going to also jump into the deep end on this one. I think so much of cyberpunk, at least in the Western world, does have an aspect of anti-Asianness in it, and that is, of course, intersected with the shame associated with sex work, I think. And that has been, of course, of a major area of which, like, as we're creating new content, maybe we should move away from that. And that's actually something that I didn't start off creating Solace State thinking about necessarily, but it certainly is an aspect which I really had to start like looking at, well, what am I actually, whose feelings am I centering here? And whose feelings have been previously centered in previous cyberpunk IPs, whether it's film or books or anything else. And so like who's actually at the periphery and fringes and are made as kind of idealized as the anti-hero? Is there an idealization, or is it much more like evocative of something authentic, right? At least in the zeitgeist of its time. So in looking at those like perhaps like access to power and so forth, what are our characters actually doing? And I really wanted to move away from this kind of fear or dystopic elements associated with like Asian bodies as monolithic and like frightening, and frightening in the way that like there is mass manufacturing of ideas and like consent as well. So moving away from that like intersection of like asceticism, I guess, of foreign bodies to that of something that on its flip side, like on it, the flip side of its coin is a lot about also mass manufacturing kind of cyborg bodies. We don't actually have cyborgs necessarily as much as like even further kind of along in timelines of what you define as cyberpunk, but nonetheless it does kind of is codified in our game. So yeah, it's like, how can we take that space back to like treat us as less of an existential threat?
And it's like it's like Dali was saying, it's a very 80s thing. Sure, it goes back further than that, but it's a very Reagan genre in a nutshell when you think about it. Like there were so many this talking exclusively about the American side of things. Even though I didn't grow in America, it's very easy to like take all of that by osmosis, pretty much. So it was a time where neoliberalism pretty much took over for good in the United States, right? And in that time, places like Japan were going through their own economic bubbles, and they were expanding worldwide, just buying foreign companies everywhere. And there was like this fear in the United States that they will take over soon, like just like they will it's like the United States will be like this cultural powerhouse. They were fearing the Japanese will become exactly that. And a lot of the cyberpunk aesthetic is about kind of demonizing this. Like they show the future, and it's all about Japanese text everywhere. Geishas are the new beauty standard. Talking more about Blade Runner here, basically. But this is why I gravitate more towards cyberpunk that's not made in the United States. I grew up watching Ghost in the Shell. That was pretty much like my first anime movie. I saw it when I was like 8. I didn't understand nothing, like, but I was so enthralled by the visuals. It became like a fixation ever since. And the more I grew, the more I understood what it was about. But then I realized that cyberpunk made in Japan and other parts of Asia, they're more focused on the characters, on the human aspect, and less so the society. And when you see the cities in Asian cyberpunk, you see all kinds of languages, but with the implication that the world is becoming one. Like there is more people from different backgrounds living in the same place. So you see signs with all kinds of languages. You see this a lot in Cowboy Bebop. I don't think that one is a very cyberpunk, but yeah, but you see that a lot in places like Mars. There is like a whole chunk of the planet that's just very like Marruecos. I don't remember how do you say that in English. Sorry. But it's all very cool. That's why I gravitated more towards that. And there is also European directors like Verhoeven, who directed Starship Troopers and RoboCop. RoboCop is like one of my favorite things ever because it's just so over the top, and it touches like that very specific American culture of gun first, ask later, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's what influenced me the most with Valhalla. Like you see this combination of the very atmospheric, very introspective aspect of Ghost in the Shell, like the movie from Mamoru Oshii, and then you have this very over the top satire, like you will see in a Verhoeven movie. And and I think that's like the DNA of what made my game real, pretty much.
Yeah, my opinion on Cyberpunk and who it's for is that I've always thought Cyberpunk was for the marginalized. And even though I actually am not a fan of Blade Runner because of how much it became a cultural zeitgeist of like, this is what Cyberpunk is in America and West. The whole point was the underdog, and a lot of like Ghost in the Shell does it, Psychopaths. I'm a big Cyberpunk anime fan as well, so I'm very obsessed, but it's always a story of someone who realizes the system and is trying to navigate it while they're stuck in it. And I've always thought that that is a power given to marginalized people in that setting. And so for me, I've always thought that Cyberpunk low-key belonged to the people who are on the fringe or the marginalized. And so my biggest hot take, I guess, is that I don't think cops should ever be the main character in Cyberpunk. And so
it makes sense.
That's my biggest, and that's kind of like what Love Shore really dives into, because our main character is an ex-vet from the military and has like, basically the whole point of it is going rogue, and the other character, Sam, went to prison for his criminal activity, and we really wanted to focus on like, if Cyberpunk is this kind of, I'm more in the dystopian aspect, clearly, but if Cyberpunk is more of this growing monetization of the person and this growing commodification of the person, then those who have always been marginalized are the ones who have to learn to navigate the out corners of this system. They are the ones who are forced to not be assimilating, because if they are, they're knocked down. And that's something that I really like what Tally said earlier, is that Cyberpunk is kind of a mirror that we're reflecting on our own personal issues now, and that like really is exemplified in Cyberpunk to an extreme to showcase that. And so and also the moment you mentioned Ghost in the Shell, I'm an incredible fan of Ghost in the Shell, and you really can see perspective differences of culture when they talk about their own Cyberpunk, because Ghost in the Shell deals a lot with Japanese imperialism, and like it's very well nuanced and incredible that when they did that, Scarlett Johansson version, a lot of it was shaved away, the nuance of it. And so I'm a big fan of anyone who comes from like a new take that isn't, I guess, influenced by Blade Runner is the cleanest way I can say it, because it adds such a fresh perspective and cultural perspective that completely differentiates what Cyberpunk means. And so I'm a big fan. That's why I like everyone's games in this call.
That's fantastic. I think this is a great segue into our next question, which is, who are the characters who are on the fringes of your game's world building? I know we've already a little bit touched on this, especially with, I think, Sun, and like, what are the rights that they're fighting for? And are you basing this off of certain influences that you've come across in the real world, whether it's in books or even news, even the news?
Yeah, I don't know if you guys will mind if I hop into it, just to pick up where I left off. but when we made Love Shore, we knew that we wanted two things to come out of it. We wanted to have you forcefully play a brown character, no matter what. We were like, there's no character choice. You're going to play someone who's brown. You're going to play someone whose name is Farah. Like, that is the gameplay that we're making. Because those are who are we, from personal backgrounds, consider the fringes in our society in that way. And our second was that we wanted to deal with what it meant to be a person based on the individual who's being faced with this challenge. So Sam and Farah, we wanted to make sure are two completely distinct characters who deal with the fact that they are commodities in the way that we do cyborgs. They deal with the fact that they are commodities and how they handle it, and they handle it very, very differently. Sam suffers from developing a sense of self. He really, really struggles with it throughout the story, versus Farah learns to understand that she can't focus entirely on the self. And so, like, it's a complete diverging path. So for us, we really, really wanted to touch on those two topics, and that those characters kind of follow those types of storylines. I just think it's cool to not be so reliant on one story structure when telling a cyberpunk setting, because I think cyberpunk is supposed to affect all the individuals differently. We live in a society, alas. Yeah.
I love that. If I might cut in, actually, was I cutting it? Anyways, I really love that, because I think for Solace State, we're looking at, like, what are those transitional periods like? What is it as, like, rights might be slowly being reduced down to nothing? What's that in-between moment like? And of course, in the last 6 years, we've really seen that almost reshuffling in real time of incredibly loss of access for a lot of marginalized people in terms of getting their political voices heard and getting actual changes. There's been a lot of pushback as well. So, like, that kind of transition period of, for example, for increasing less democratized institutions and so forth, how does that kind of come about? And so one thing that Solace State is really looking at is, like, what does the centralized commercial militarization of biotech look like? And, like, a lot of this is somewhat inspired by, like, Cambridge Analytica's exploits on the political system. What if that is also tied in with huge lobbying groups associated with that of privatized police and security? So we really wanted to see it from a singular person's perspective for that kind of limitation of information, and how one person could still create, like, ripple effects of impacts from both kind of interpersonal relationships, as well as things that they say in public. So looking at different kind of discourses of public opinion and seeing how public opinion in it of itself is shaped is something that we're really excited to explore. It's I think I really am excited to look at transitional governance, because I think it isn't something that is said a lot in many different forms of media. One thing that we found is, like, a lot of even films, for example, kind of end on, like, oh, there's a protest, and it's like the end, and then you get all of the interesting bits at the, like, at the end credits with the black screen, and I'm always, like, curious, what is that actually? What is that like?
And when you think about it, that's pretty much the plus we have as a medium. You know, we have interactive worlds to explore and stuff. Like, even, like, I'm not saying it in the most literal sense, like, oh, open world or anything like that. It's just like you live in this world right now during the runtime of this game. You're inside here and you get to live by its rules. So it's very natural that you want to explore all of this in something where the player has agency. I think it's very cool.
And having that kind of limitation, like, it's not fully like a run and gun anymore, because not all people are capable of doing that in society. And in fact, like, many of the characters aren't anyone who would have a license to shoot or understand firearms or care about firearms, except, you know, that maybe they don't necessarily have an interest in seeing that in their society. So it's like all of these things with like, how can we come to see a loss of civil and social human rights is what I'm really interested of, and what Solace State really is basing it off of. And I think for me, a challenge is coming from a political science background. I sometimes get too like bogged down by like the terminology, and it's exciting on a completely different level, I guess, to me. But it's also like it gets into the weeds a little bit. It's very specific. It's not in a way creating a kind of bubble of distance. Is maybe something that is just not as accessible or as interesting to many people, and I can definitely understand that. So yeah, like giving players choices, I completely agree with you, Chris. Like just putting someone in that space a little bit more can hopefully cultivate a little bit more of conversation, like encourage that, at least starting points of that. So yes.
The thing I was sort of thinking about,
No. Please continue.
I was just absorbing all that in, and I agree with most of it. Yeah, the thing, I also sort of come from an academic background. Sort of like Indigenous knowledge is the discipline, but you deal with a lot of political science stuff as well, because Indigenous issues tend to be things that end up being political issues a lot of the time. And yeah, well, so like I guess I'll just start sort of with the game I made. The idea is that the characters are, 4 teenagers and a penguin, and they are in this space, this neoliberal hellscape, and they just have to exist, because the point of the game is to say that it's actually gone too far now that you can't change it. The end is around the corner very soon, and when you play the game, you see that does come true. And that all this sort of talking about fixing it later didn't pay off at all, or this idea that the decisions that were made that should have been made 20 years ago weren't made, and it's too late now. And the idea of Umurangi Generation, the reason it's called that is it's sort of the idea of the red sky generation, or like the sunset generation, the last one that has to watch. Because I think there's that idea that generationally, there's always this sort of, I guess, theme that we have to watch what's happening, but we can't do because of the system at play, where all the power is situated at the top, and to get there, you need to sort of. There's the thing, I think, where it's like you either invest, your entire life, and by the time you are at that position, it's too late, or you have sort of, I think. What we see in this space, where you do sometimes get younger politicians coming in, but it's this thing where you can watch in real time the stripping away of those values and the sort of homogenization of that sort of person into the political machine. But I guess the thing I've just sort of been thinking about is sort of about like when we show like cyberpunk stuff, like with the game I made, it was about neoliberalism, and I'll talk about it mainly from the perspective of the DLC, because I think it strikes the iron probably pretty warm or hot. The DLC is essentially about what would happen if in these situations where the UN takes control, the UN were also fascists, right? Like they had sort of been taken over by fascists, and those fascists were now using the very tools that they claim to protect you with to keep you under their boot, right? And the idea around that being that in the last level of the DLC, it is a protest, but it's a protest, I think, that's handled differently around a lot of this stuff, because instead of the protest being one where the main protagonists do the protest and then everything's fixed, the idea is that the main protagonists do the protest peacefully, and then they arrive close to the UN's statue of 2 robots being gung-ho, and then what the UN does is they lock down the area and stop anyone from getting out. They call in one of those said robots, these giant Ava robot things to sit over the protesters, and then they call the cops in, and the cops bash the protesters, including you, and that's how the game ends, with you waking up on a roof with your friends getting out, and you can see the violence that's occurred by the UN. And I think the idea around that was to say, actually, this is the same rule breaking that's been happening for the last 400 years. None of this is new. The idea of that saying that this is the same thing that, like, the level takes place in an area called Beneath Gate Park. Gate Park is, a place my family resisted the British Army. But a few weeks later, it was this thing where the British Army came into a different part and they broke their own rules. They killed kids, they killed old people, they killed women, because they weren't able to do this stuff lawfully. Like, they weren't able to. They tried doing their combat and they lost. So then they broke their own rules. And I think it's interesting that what we saw last year, and we saw it very clearly with all the footage online and everything, is that the police were willing to break their own rules if it meant that they could do whatever they wanted. And I think that's part of the mirror of saying what that's looking at is the rule breaking. It's looking at why this system, the police system, is broken. We don't care about individuals in this thing. I don't care if this cop saved 1 million kittens in 1 year. We're talking about a system here where these people do this stuff over and over again. So that's just kind of what I was thinking around that.
Mm-hmm. I gotta get that DLC. I only have the main game.
Just to quickly note, the whole concept of Umurangi Generations is like a recurrent dream I've had since I was a child. Like, the whole setting. And when I played it for the first time, I was like, oh, this is cool. This is like Jet Set Radio inspired photo thing. Pretty nice. Then I looked at the city. I'm like, oh fuck. Oh shit, this is like the dream I had like a decade ago. Fuck. And I was so I don't know, just impressed by it, and I just kept playing. Well, not kept playing, I just wishlisted it because it wasn't out yet. It was just a demo. I'm like, oh man, I need to play the full game. So
I'll send you a copy. You have played it, eh?
Yeah.
You posted those images online, yeah.
So regarding the question, just to very quickly go over it, a lot of Valhalla is pretty much our experience living in Venezuela, right? Venezuela is not what the world thinks it is, right? In one side, you have let's not talk about sides. It's actually pretty dicey. So let's say it's not the leftist paradise many people think it is. A lot of left-leaning folks in the United States think it's all like oh man, I'm just walking on a landmine here. Let's say everybody there is oppressed, right? There is an actual history of racism and whatnot in Venezuela, but right now, literally everybody, unless you're in the government, unless you're in their good side, you're literally an enemy of the state. And I'm not even exaggerating things. Some game developers were actually jailed. Some firemen were actually jailed as well by the secret police for taking pictures of a donkey and saying it was the president. That happened. It's very real, and that's the reason I basically maintain my whole Venezuelan identity, not as a secret, but low key, just I didn't want to call attention to the fact I'm Venezuelan because of that. Valhalla doesn't have any explicit name dropping of Venezuelan authorities, but they don't care about that. They see the punk doing the punk game, and then let's jail that guy. and I actually experienced some pretty dangerous encounters with the Venezuelan government. I'm not gonna go into details about that either. Just gonna leave it that. Uh, and Valhalla is pretty much all of my life living in that country, just what I've gone through. I'm so, for example, there is a couple bits in Valhalla where you see like the news are discussing there is like food shortages. There is a lot of political unrest. Authoritarians are just rising up, just taking away civil liberties, and that's a lot of stuff I've been experiencing since 2002, 2001, something like that. Like Chavez rose up to power in like a very nice public image. You know, everybody hates capitalism, so he was like, yeah, sure, let's vote for this guy. He had like 70% popularity, but then the United States tried to, you know, put another person in power, and he became extreme about it, and it was just a it went downhill from there, basically. And it's not like something that only affected the rich people. Like people say like, oh, only the rich are fleeing Venezuela because the government took away their companies. No, man, I'm not rich. like before Valhalla, I wasn't rich, and my family still had to escape. So when you play Valhalla, you may not see all of these in explicit detail, but when you play it with this in mind, with this context of how horrible things were back there, you start to see just where I was coming from, where we were coming from. There is like there's just so much that Valhalla has from our own experience living there. But it really sucks that I can go into detail, but maybe in a book, I don't know. I just need to feel safe first. Sorry if it got too heavy, but that's how Cyberpunk should be made, I guess. With that huge punch, I guess. You want to punch someone, just do it through your art.
Yeah. May we all in marginalized communities and from groups one day feel safe. I really think, honestly, that's such a privilege that's a specific privilege that not everyone can have. Like, feel safe to do the art and to be able to shout from rooftops about like what exactly that intersection of identity you want to portray.
Yeah, and I'm living in Argentina right now, and I still don't feel safe. I need to, like, you know, couple years maybe to start embracing that identity.
Yeah, it's such like, I definitely hear that really resonates with me, that kind of cultural erasure thing. So thank you so much for sharing that, and I feel like I'm learning a lot.
I do definitely agree with you
I have
about
to replay the Valhalla. Go ahead.
I was going to say, Chris, I really do definitely agree with you about the whole, like leftists sort of saying Venezuela is a utopia or whatever, because I know that that also tends to happen with Aotearoa, like New Zealand, where, you know, comparatively it looks quite good, or compared to, but they don't necessarily see the sort of, like, I guess, state-based oppression and things like that, where that's, you know what I mean? They're not necessarily experiencing, which I think it's interesting how you put that in the art, and I know it's one of those things, where you kind of don't really want to talk about it because it's hard to because it could come off the wrong way that you're trying to be a centrist about it or anything, but it's one of those things where I think it's the reality of it, and when it's the reality like that, I think it's one of those things where you can't distort that truth, because it's like it's
just a part of you.
Like it's like you know, like I was just thinking, you know, you can't like one of the things when I made the DLC was the idea of saying, well, let's not distort the truth of how fascism works. You know, let's show it for what's actually going on in that space, and if it's doing these things, it's doing these things. And you know, I think with games as an art form, you know, what you're talking about there and stuff, it's like, as an art form, I think it only grows stronger when, you know, we stop sort of like stepping away from those edges and explaining and talking about these things. Like, you know, part of the reason of putting the fascist stuff in the DLC was because in most games when fascism's portrayed, it's portrayed in the very like watered down version where it can all be explained in one sentence at the end that the person was just possessed by a demon or was crazy. You know, it's not about the huge, you know, net of how that happened. You know, like you're talking about stuff with Chavez and stuff that like I'm not too familiar with Venezuelan politics, but I can imagine
complex.
I'm imagining it didn't happen overnight with what's going on there, and it's it's hard to talk about. So I really commend you for that.
Yeah, and I wish we could all be safer too, and we definitely don't have you know, non-marginalized privilege to sometimes even say these things. So it's, or say more. Sorry. So and I think some people don't understand that, like how much work that requires, how much mental, artistic, creative, emotional work that takes to unpack and rewrite and articulate and find the language for it. Sorry, I have to ask for a quick wrap up because we are going to ask for just super fast all of your calls to action, reintroduce yourself, and where everyone can find you. Of course, we have a lot of interesting personal stories to tell through our games. So let's start off in the same order again, starting with Sun. If you want to talk about where to find your game, what you're doing for LudoNarraCon, take it away. Yeah.
Hi. So, Sun. Our game is Love Shore. You can wishlist it on Steam. For LudoNarraCon, we're going to be streaming for 4 days. We have a playlist of all of our music in Love Shore, which has been a really big hype point for us, so we hope that you enjoy it, as well as a talk with our main composer, and as well as the team is going to be playing our second demo, because we haven't played it in a year, and we're about to make fun of it. So join us in one of the 4 days, and have a laugh, and and you can find me on Twitter as Bog Boogie.
Awesome. Cool. Okay, we have like 30 seconds for each person. Take it away, Chris.
Oh crap. Play Cyberpunk Bartender Action Valhalla is available right now on Steam. You can follow me on Twitter at Kirin51, at Sukeban Games as well. Wishlist please, Nirvana, because that one's coming out who knows when, but you know, you'll get notified, and Steam likes a lot that you wishlist stuff. So go do that, please.
Definitely.
Thanks everyone for listening to us. It's a shame we couldn't talk longer, but thank you. And if you'd like to follow Umurangi Generation's development into getting ported on Switch and stuff like that, you can follow it at Umurangi Game on Twitter. That's UMURANGI. You can also follow me on Twitter, but I mainly just shitpost and retweet anti-Valve.
Such
memes,
good shitposts.
I'd encourage you to check everyone out, and if you like what I was talking about and you want to know what that looks like in a game, play the game. Thank you.
Please support all of these amazing, beautiful games. I'm Tanya Khan. I forgot earlier to mention that I go by she, her. And you can follow me on Vivid Foundry, on Instagram, Twitch, and Twitter. And we also have a Discord channel that's pretty active at discord.gg/Solace State. You can also wishlist our game, and it helps us a lot. Our game is called Solace State, not Solid State, but Solace as in Haven. And that's all we have time for. Thank you so much for joining us. I hope to continue the conversation. Support all these games. Bye!